The lightsaber, a weapon of a more civilized age. But where's the handguard? Let's talk about handguards and lightsabers. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. Let's turn the lights on. Hi folks, Matt Easton here. So, this is a lightsaber that I've just received from Sabers. We're going to be looking at lightsabers here from Sabers and also from Damien Saber, and I'll put links of both of those down below. But this isn't a review. This is a question of hand protection. Now you might be wondering, this is a HEMA channel. I talk about history, I talk about fencing, martial arts, historical warfare. What on earth am I doing talking about lightsabers? Well, the fact is, I'm a bit of a Star Wars geek, and I know that some of you are as well, but also it gives us another way, another avenue, another route into talking about swordsmanship, the practicalities thereof, and if there was ever a future in which future swords came into use, some of the considerations that we might want to think about in terms of how weapons might be designed. And also it looks back into history. It looks back, why do certain swords have handguards? Why do certain swords not need handguards? So recently I dished out some of the lightsabers that I've been sent by Damien Saber, in that case, to my HEMA club mates. And we had some fun, we had some fighting. We found that basically we could use them like we fence with longswords. So normally we're fencing with things like long swords or sabers or side swords or rapiers or things like this. And we found that fundamentally, yes, you can take one of these swords that are meant for combat, for sparring, so long as they are tough enough and up to it, and you can put protective gear on and you can fight with them. There are some differences, and without going into a huge amount of depth, yes, of course, the fact that you don't have edge alignment means you can hit you can hit at angles like this that you don't need to think about which direction the edge is pointing in. You can just cut from any angle you want to. So that actually enables you to do certain techniques or certain types of motion that wouldn't make sense with a bladed weapon. It might make sense with a stick or a bat or a mace, but it wouldn't make sense with an edged weapon where you've got to think about which direction the edge is cutting in, and also the body mechanics of how you cut, whether it's a chopping cut, whether it's a flicking cut, or whether it's a slicing, drawing or pushing cut. This is more or less irrelevant to this type of plasma energy weapon. So here we're simply thinking about applying the edge in any sort of way. Now, again, I don't want to go into too much of a tangent. In the future, we could talk about things that you would do with a lightsaber if a lightsaber was a real thing that we don't really do very much in real swordsmanship, because there are ways you could use them that doesn't make sense with a sharpened steel blade, but would make sense with an energy weapon like this. Anyway, right, so hand protection. The other major thing we noticed when we started sparring with these was we were getting hit in the hands a lot. Now, admittedly, losing hands is quite Star Wars canon. It does feature obviously to Anakin and to Luke and various other people. So chopping hands off, absolutely chopping arms off is absolutely a thing. So that means that your hands are super vulnerable with any kind of weapon whereby the blade can slide down the other blade and just even accidentally catch you in the fingers. So when it comes to swords, or in this case lightsabers, there's essentially three things we've got to think about or consider with hand protection. The first issue is, as I mentioned, a blade sliding down. So even just, you know, parrying or blocking with the blade, which we know they do in Star Wars, we've seen it on the movies. So they cross the blade, for example, unless the blades stick, which admittedly it does seem like the blades are treated as if they're a bit sticky in Star Wars, but if they slide down, and definitely with these slidey, slippy blades they do, if it slides down, it's very easy for accidentally to hit you on the hand. That's the first thing. The second thing to consider is someone deliberately targeting your hand. So when we're doing longsword, all the time, if you get an opening to someone's hands, then you get them in the hands, because if you can disable someone's hands, it might not kill them, but it's going to make them a very ineffective fighter. So deliberately targeting the hands is the next thing. So clearly, firstly, accidentally getting hit in the hand by the blade sliding down, or deliberately being targeted in the hand, are very real things you've got to be aware of when using this type of weapon. But the third thing, which people often forget about, is often a handguard isn't necessarily to protect you from your opponent's blade. Sometimes it's to protect you from your own blade. And quite simply, if we've got a weapon which has the ability to injure us, we don't want during our fighting to suddenly find that our hand has slipped up onto the blade. Now, admittedly, there are certain weapons in the world, ethnographically and historically, which don't have very much hand protection or hand stop. For example, a kukri from Nepal or a da from Burma. So there are weapons which don't have much hit, and admittedly, if we look at a lightsaber, it's actually quite similar to a Burmese da. A lot of people compare them to things like Japanese katana and wakizashi, but actually they're more similar to a Burmese da. So there are weapons which indeed historically don't have anything to prevent you from doing that, but they usually have quite a lot of friction on the grip, and you'll notice even on the design of lightsaber handles, you often have something like that, that at least has a sort of hand stopping effect, both in terms of friction, but in terms of the fact that you feel that your hands come up against that. But nevertheless, hand guards have these three basic functions. Blades sliding down and just accidentally, as it happens when you're trying to parry, it hitting you in the hand. A person deliberately targeting your hand, or your hand slipping up onto the blade and disabling yourself. So, lightsabers with guards, are they a good idea? Yes, I would say that for all of the reasons, while it's true to say that in the real world we have historical weapons which don't have handguards, I would say that in a imaginary Star Wars universe where there are lots of lightsabers around, we might indeed find some which don't have handguards on, but we would also find some like this, which have handguards. So this is one from Damien Saber that they've sent me, specifically based on the last video we did where we were sparring and we were like, yeah, we wish we had hand protection. And this is to protect our little fingers and thumbs. So absolutely fantastic idea. And you can see this one is modelled on either a Japanese Suba guard or perhaps the type of guard you find on certain Chinese swords like a Dao as well. So there are certain swords which have a disc guard like this. They tend to be Asian swords. There's also the Kora has a disc guard as well. So disc guard's quite popular in Asia. And this makes all kinds of sense. Now, this is found in the Star Wars universe if you want to go down the deep lore. So we do, for example, I think Kanan Jarrus has in Star Wars Rebels has a sort of disc guard. So they are there. If you want to use a disc guard, I'd recommend it for all of those reasons. It protects you from accidentally getting hit on the hand quite so easily. It, to some degree, protects the hands from people targeting your hands, but we'll come back to that point because the Suba or small disc guard is not actually particularly good at that. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, it prevents you from accidentally sliding your hand up onto the blade, which I actually find I do if I don't have a guard there. But there is another option as well, and also from Damien Saber we have, yeah, that's right, we've essentially got a saber guard. Now this is somewhat similar to Ezra Bridges' kind of blaster saber, for example. And I actually freaking love that. So if you watched our video where we were fighting, I actually ended up fighting in a sort of cross after an evolution, after trial and error. I started out trying to do longsword with it, and I find that me personally, the best way for me to use this type of lightsaber was actually using it like crossing a saber with a single stick with a rapier, probably. So I was using lots of thrusting, and I was using it predominantly one-handed and keeping the offside of my body back. But because I'm used to making parries formed like a saber, it makes an awful lot of sense for me to have a saber guard. Now, the last thing I want to say about do guards on sabers, lightsabers make sense? They certainly make sense on sabers. Do they make sense on lightsabers? Well, I would argue, yes, they do. So a lot of people in the comment sections, when people have said, oh, lightsabers should clearly have handguards on them, and I kind of agree, have said, oh, but what's the point? Because the lightsaber blade will just cut through the thing. Well, let's think about those 3 points. So we've got a person, a blade sliding down and accidentally clipping your hand. Well, we know from watching Star Wars and things like Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, lightsabers don't instantly cut through metallic objects. They sometimes have to sort of be pushed through, like a door when you're cutting through a door, or Vader's armour in his duel in Empire Strikes Back. In Bespin, so they don't instantly cut through pieces of metal. So even if this was just steel, okay, a lightsaber blade sliding down here, it would still give you enough momentary protection, probably, for that lightsaber blade to come down and skip off the guard. So it might take a chunk out of the guard, but better a chunk out of the guard than a chunk out of your hand, okay? The next one is deliberately targeting of that hand. Well, equally, even though technically a lightsaber can chop through metal, even if you've got a piece of metal there to act as a momentary shield, it will slightly protect your hand. Some guards more than others. So this disc guard will provide some level of protection. The saber guard will provide a different type of protection, less protection at the top, more at the front, knuckle bow. But the final one is really, really important, because remember what I said about how often we find that our hand slides up onto the blade. Well, regardless of what a lightsaber blade can do to a piece of metal, that would still stop your hand sliding up. So it still makes sense to have a handguard that stops your hand sliding up onto the blade. Okay. Now, the last thing to say is, remember, we do have materials in the Star Wars universe that are lightsaber proof to some degree. So we've got things like cortosis, we've got Beskar. So if you can get hold of Beskar, for example, you could make your handguard like this out of purest Beskar. So if you were a Mandalorian with a lightsaber, then absolutely, why not have a Beskar handguard on your lightsaber? Because we know that a Beskar spear and Beskar armor can stop a lightsaber blade. So why not have a guard? Why not have a sword guard made out of it? Whether it's a saber guard or whether it's a Suba, a small Japanese style guard, whatever. So here's the top thing. I think that, yes, as in the real world, we do find some weapons, some swords, some knives, which don't have a visible or really tangible big handguard. There's the Burmese Dar, there's the Kukri, there's various others throughout history. Even Bronze Age swords don't really have much in the way of a handguard. So absolutely, I'm not saying that these are wrong. I'm not saying the classic lightsaber is wrong. Okay, but what I'm saying is that I think that in a world where people fight with lightsabers, especially in the days of the Old Republic where there were lots more people around with lightsabers, absolutely, you would get lots of them with different forms of handguard. Knuckle bows, perhaps even swept hilts, Suba type guards, cross guards. And we know that these exist in the graphic novels and stuff as well as some of the TV shows. So my answer, do lightsabers, or rather do handguards make sense on lightsabers? And I would argue yes. For real-world historical reasons, for swordsmanship reasons, for practicality reasons, and even within the canon, even a straight basic steel guard would provide some level of hand protection, better than nothing. And if you can have that, replace that steel with something like Beskar or cortosis or something like this, then that would make even more sense. And possibly even shields and armour and stuff made of that as well. Anyway, well, as the Mandalorians do. So there we go. I hope this has been interesting. Thanks again to Damien Saber and also N Sabers for sending all of these lightsabers. This will result, I'm certain, in lots more fighting in my club and experimentation with these lightsabers. Let's see how tough they are. Let's do some proper reviews of these, and let's see what other things we discover from playing around with these new toys. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope I'll see you back on the channel soon. Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.